Messy money. I was talking to a client the other day and she was describing the way she felt about her money. And she paralleled that to her daughter's bedroom, walking in and seeing this mess, not knowing where to begin. And she's like, wait a minute, this is just the way my money is before I started working with Lisa in the Wealth Accelerator. I felt like it was such a hot mess that I couldn't figure out what was coming in and what was going out. And that's exactly why I started my community, The Smell of Money, where we can connect with money in a relationship way because you don't have a math problem. You have a relationship problem. And if this is something that you're ready to tackle, then I invite you to join The Smell of Money, where we begin with a money awareness challenge. In just 7 days, you'll connect with your money and figure out exactly what it's doing so that you can build true wealth. To join, the link is in the comments. If you're tired of feeling shame about past financial decisions, worried you'll never achieve financial stability, and ready for a clear plan to take control of your money and experience true financial freedom, you're in the right place. Hey, I'm Lisa, wealth activator, independent insurance broker, and your guide to rewriting your money story. I learned the secret to creating financial freedom and stability after divorce, and I'm ready to share it with you. If you're ready for steady, stress-free income, clarity with your money, and the confidence to spend without guilt, grab your favorite essential oil, take a deep breath, and let's sniff our way through the smell of money. Today, we are spending some time with Stephanie Peirolo, who is a board-certified executive coach and author. Her book, I love this title, The Saint and the Drunk, A Guide to Making the Big Decisions in Your Life. And as some of you know, I've had some issues with drinking. I was sober for a year, went to Italy and started drinking wine again, but I stayed sober, which is good. But I was thinking about the contrast of when we make decisions with a clear mind versus an unclear mind. And when we're stressed out about money and things are chaotic and we just don't have a plan in place, we are not able to make the big decisions. So I'm happy to have Stephanie here to share her journey with us. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I'm excited to hear. I can't wait to read your book. I love the title. What inspired you to write it?
Well, the saint refers to Saint Ignatius of Loyola, who was a saint in the Middle Ages who came up with a way of making decisions. And it's called the Spiritual Exercises of Saint Ignatius of Loyola. And it's very esoteric. It's super Catholic. And I did it in my 30s, and it completely changed how I made decisions. And as I became an executive coach, and even before that with friends, they would ask me how I made decisions, and I would feel different about describing it to them because it is a spiritual practice. And I
Mm-hmm.
had so many of my executive coaching clients ask me about decision making that I tried to figure out a way to make that accessible to them. And I realized that in the recovery community, in the 12-step community, there is an idea of a higher power. And so I combined the Saint Ignatius of Loyola and the drunk, who is Bill Wilson, the co-founder, one of the co-founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, what if I take these spiritual principles and refract them through a lens that is for people who are not religious? Maybe they're not even consider themselves spiritual, but really use more of an intentional focus. And I started using that content with my clients and with friends and family members. And they were like, you got to write this down. And so I did. And it's a simple workbook for using discernment and developing a discernment practice, which I think of as really kind of developing an inner compass. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I talk about is you mentioned the idea of money being messy
Mm-hmm.
and one of the kind of central pieces of this book, in fact, the whole middle section, is about the narratives that we are burdened with. And this came from working with my clients. They would have these ideas that they believed were fact that were actually just stories told to them by their culture. So it might be about, as a woman, how much power do we get to have? Who is the caregiver? And there were there's 9 stories, but one of the chapters is about money, because we all carry so many narratives about money.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times we think they're facts. We think they are mutable and true. And it's only when we really look under the surface that we realize, wait, I've been carrying this story my whole life. It no longer serves me.
I love that. And it is true, the money stories that we tell ourselves. Part of my wealth accelerator, we have a call called the Profit Gold Mind, and we talk about our money stories and what we carry from generations. And, you think about our great grandparents, what they lived through, and the scarcity mindset, and, the depression and the recessions and the wars and the famine and all of that. And it's like, wow. So we learn these things that we have no idea why we're doing it. And we're making these decisions. And then we get upset because things don't work our way, especially as entrepreneurs, as we navigate building our business and sustaining, income to take care of our needs and then our wants. So when you think about your own journey, what was that like for you?
Well, I think that there was a kind of complex interplay. Like, certainly, my family has both kind of a scarcity and abundance mentality. My father's parents came from Italy in a boat. They were never wealthy. My grandfather told stories about getting a pair of shoes once a year, and when he
Yeah.
grew out of them, he went barefoot until the next fall. And so that was one side, and this very much of an immigrant work ethic. You work hard, you provide for your family. That's your whole focus, right? And
Mhm.
so, growing up in that family, I wanted to be a writer. And I remember my father writing me this long letter when I was at college saying, "Let's think of a career that is stable where you write. How about going to law school?" It's like, writing books and law school, that's not. And so I ended up in a career in advertising, which was not what I wanted to do, but it was a way for me to take care of my kids. I was a single mom pretty young and still make money. And then on
Mhm.
my mom's side of the family, my grandmother had grown up in the Depression, and she was always, even though she was well to do, she was always from a scarcity mindset. Right. I
Mhm.
remember her taking her thumb and scraping the little scraps of butter off the wrapper to get those last little bits. And she clearly could have afforded as much butter as she was required to have for that recipe, but it was that sort of mindset. And then I
Mhm.
think also in my family, on my mom's side, there were very specific narratives of who got to spend money, right?
Mhm.
So the men spent money on their hobbies. There were boats, there were, nice hunting gear, camping. And yet the women tended to have like old nightgowns that were ratty and bras that should have been replaced years ago and really jerry rigged toasters in the kitchen. And it wasn't because there wasn't enough money to buy a toaster or a bra or a nightgown. It was because that was considered to be less important and less worthy of investment
Mhm.
than some of the things that the men were doing. And so for me, there was a lot of baggage to sort through. And I think also when I got divorced, I was young, my kids were young, their father moved to Europe, and I was really broke. I mean, like, how am I gonna feed everybody working 3 jobs 7 days a week? And I think when you go through that kind of financial insecurity, it does change your perspective. And so I
Mhm.
really had to do some work as I got older and I got more financial security to recognize I don't have to take every job. I don't have to work 60, 70 hours a week, that I can balance my need for financial security with also getting to rest. And, I try not to work 7 days a week anymore. And that combination of having compassion for why I had to do that. I legitimately was a single mom trying to support my kids, but also realizing I don't need to continue to do that at this stage in my life.
Mhm. And I love the way that you described the contrast. And I think a lot of us grew up that way. My family was the same. My dad grew up poor. My mom grew up in a wealthy family. And, the hard work. I hear this a lot. Like, I have to work hard. And it's a common belief in my community, the smell of money. Like, oh, I have to work really hard. And like, what does that really mean? And so have you really worked hard? And we have this concept, this understanding that if we don't do certain things, we will never get money, and understanding that money's for everybody. And, we get to enjoy wealth, but how we're spending our money is so important. So when you think about this, I got that visual of your grandmother scraping that butter. And I know my grandmother used to save all the little rubber bands and ties and the twisties. I'm like, why? Why are we hoarding everything? Because there's a use for it somehow or other. And I always find that really interesting. So when you think about the ups and the downs and the lessons, you went through a lot being a single parent and that underlining message of, I want to be a writer, but that's not good enough. We told our daughter the same thing. She wanted to go to school for journalism. And we were like, why don't you, get a career in nursing? So she never, went to school to become a writer, but it was on her heart. And I think how horrible I am as a parent to deter my child from their dream because you want them to be successful. You don't want to see them struggle. So, what kind of lesson did you carry through thinking? I mean, you did end up writing, being in advertising, you have to write a lot, but did that ever play a part on how you earned or received your money? Or did
No,
it?
and in fact, I would invite you to reframe your narrative about your advice to your daughter, because I look at the advice that my father gave me, and I'm glad he told me that.
Hmm.
Because I certainly it was not part of my life plan to be a single mother of 2 children and the
Right.
breadwinner in my piece, but that's what happened, and I was really glad that I had the education to, jump right into a career and support my family. I mean, my dad also taught me, he'd raised me as if I was a son, right? I mean, he had 2 daughters, and it's me and my sister, and he was like, I couldn't learn how to drive the car. I couldn't use the family car until I knew how to change a tire and change the fan belt.
Mm.
And, like he taught me all these really practical skills and he taught me how to work. He told me about having jobs and negotiating when I was literally in elementary school. Like I am not trying to teach my kids how to negotiate ever. Right. And so I feel like in equipping me to be support myself, he did me a real service.
Hmm.
And he wasn't wrong. And I think what I recognized is that being an artist takes a commitment. And
Hmm.
for me, that commitment meant I just kept writing. It took me 40 years to be published by an actual publisher with my book, The Saint and the Drunk, that just came out. But I still have a published book and I have written a lot and I really enjoy it. I have a Substack where I called Fierce Grace, where I put out, about 1,500 words every week. And so it's really, I think, recognizing that you do need to make money and
Hmm.
you also get to follow your dreams, but it's being realistic about that. Like one of the reasons that I wanted to write this book is that a lot of career decision making advice is around just follow your heart, manifest your reality. And those are good pieces of advice, but most of us have very clear guardrails
Hmm.
and we need to be mindful of those, right? So when I was a single mom, I could have been a writer. I could have gone and got my master's in fine arts, but it wasn't really realistic for me to drag my kids around the country to, that wasn't what I wanted to do. And so it's really about looking at what are my values, what's important to me, what are my responsibilities, and what are the reality? What's the reality that I live in? Right. And that is part of it because one of the things that I've realized as I get older is and really unpack some of these narratives is that a lot of times as women, we are told that it is our personal failing
Hmm.
rather than acknowledging there's a systemic point of view. So,
Hmm.
for example, I had a lot of shame when I was young and didn't have money and was raising these 2 kids by myself because I didn't have enough money to pay my bills.
Hmm.
I had my electricity threatened to be shut off. I had many things go into collections. My credit rating was terrible, and I felt so ashamed of that. And it wasn't until later that I recognized, studies show that when a heterosexual couple gets divorced, the woman has trouble financially and the man usually fares better
Hmm.
after the divorce. And I was working in a system where childcare was taking half of my take-home income, right?
Hmm.
Where there's so many systemic issues, the cost of childcare, the cost of healthcare, the cost of insurance. And so part of it for me was going back and kind of retroactively forgiving myself and recognizing that, of course, I have personal responsibility, but there's an interplay with the systems in which we live, and that there's really no point in me having a lot of shame around the financial situations that I was in when they were not of my own making. They were a product of the system in which I live.
Yeah, and the labels that society gives us, sometimes we accept them as our own when it's just external information that, has nothing to do with us personally. Um, Sure, our audience is interested to know, how did you get out of the debt, the collections, and start paying your bills on time and living in a place where money was available to you and you didn't have to worry and stress out about whether or not you're going to pay your electric bill on time?
I worked really, really hard, and I took jobs that were somewhat risky in order to increase my salary. I don't know that I would recommend that. If my daughter came to me, I would not give her that advice, but
Mhm.
it worked for me. So I'd started out as a journalist, and then I moved into advertising sales, which was at the time lucrative. I worked on commission, which is no kind of security, right?
Right.
And I worked really, really hard. It faced a lot of sexual harassment. I mean,
Mm,
I'm 63, so this was a generation ago. It was bad, and there really
mhm.
wasn't much that I could do. And then I learned how to sell, and then I moved into business development, working for tech companies and advertising agencies. And again, it's very hard work, very stressful. Everybody looks at you and says, "You have to close a $10 million deal." And there's a lot of pressure, and I did well at it, but I was not great it was very stressful. It was really difficult. I remember my best friend, we've been best friends since we were kids. She said, "Yeah, that whole period of your time, you were very alert," because I was smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day, living off of coffee. I was really skinny. I didn't get to the gym. I didn't basically do anything but take care of my kids and go to work. And,
Mhm.
I'm glad that I was able to achieve a level of financial security. But at the same time, I wish now looking back that I had done something that was a little bit more sustainable, because the challenge with those risky jobs is that it's easy to get fired. There
Mhm.
isn't any it's like it's not really set up for sort of long-term stability and security.
Right.
And I wish now that I had gone for something that was a little bit more secure, as opposed to just going after, like, the big buck.
Right. Well, that experience shaped who you are today and has given you the skill set to be able to turn around and help others and write this beautiful story. So, I know everything happens for a reason. So, thank you for sharing that. I know our audience loves to hear that information because they're always looking, everyone promotes get rich quick schemes. And, affiliate marketing is really big, but, some of the MLM strategies, the digital marketing, it can get really, blown up out of proportion, I think, because they don't understand how hard you have to work. We call it the hustle generation where you're constantly hustling in order to do it. I'm an independent insurance broker and we're completely on commissions. So I know that, but I retired from the Social Security Administration after a 30-year career. So I know the stability, but I also have heard thousands and thousands of stories of people working and losing everything because the employers made, poor investment choices like, the fall of global crossings and people right near social security age losing their 401ks and like I can't retire. So having that financial stability is so important. I think it's more important than, thinking about how am I going to achieve it, but when we get that money, how are we going to invest it so that we can be protected in case something does happen? So what is one thing that you wish women knew about money?
I wish that they would be a little bit more selfish about money. I have seen a lot of women who have co-signed loans for lovers or kids, for education, for cars, for whatever, and I wish that they would not do that. I wish that they would
Mm,
prioritize their own financial well-being and understand that the situation they're in right now may not be the situation they're in 10 or 20 years, right? I
yeah.
mean, a woman who's married who feels like she has a lot of financial security, her, spouse could die, they could get divorced. Things happen in life that precipitate real changes. And I think that the second part of that is reframe what success looks like.
Mhm,
Right? How much money do you have to be comfortable, right? It's not
mhm.
like you don't have to be as rich as your neighbors or as rich as, like there's a discussion. I live in Seattle. There's a lot of rich people here. And I remember being at a party and people were talking about their number, which is the amount of money they felt like they had to have in order to retire
Yep.
successfully. And it was like 5, $10 million. I'm like, I'm never gonna have $5 million. That's not happening. So, how can I reframe what success looks like and make
Mhm.
sure that it's mine and not somebody else's story.
Yeah, I love that, and that's perfect because wealth means something different to each of us. And like, I have clients who are perfectly happy on $30,000 a year and I mean, they're saving for retirement. They live in a nice home. They drive one car, and their needs are and their desires are being met in the way that they want to live their lifestyle. I liked how you said, like, don't worry about what your neighbor is doing because a lot of times we're comparing ourselves like, oh, look at all the toys that they have. They've had several guests on the show that experienced the, era of 2008 where they had all this wealth, all these material things, and then the next day it's gone. Like, I have nothing because I've lost everything. My grandmother used to tell me, don't put all your eggs in one basket and be like, okay, what does this mean? What does that mean, grandma? So she taught me a lot of knowledge, taught me a lot of things about finances that I probably wouldn't have learned else otherwise because as you know, it wasn't taught in the schools. So when you think about your journey and how you got into executive, so you left the advertising agency and you went into executive coaching. Tell us about that transition.
So advertising was not a great place for me. I had just, again, the sexual harassment, the sexism, especially as I got older. And in advertising, older is over 40. I was like, how about if I get into consulting? And so I got a master's degree in transformational leadership and then started doing just general consulting. And then one of my clients, who was a CEO, a woman who's a CEO of an advertising agency, said, "You've run an ad agency. You have this degree. Come and be my executive coach." And I was like, all right. And I found that there were a lot of women who wanted a woman who had run an ad agency to help them. And then I branched out into working with male leaders and people who worked in any kind of a creative organization. If you make cool
Mhm.
stuff, there's a way of working with creatives and leading people who think creatively, right? Whether they're building products or developing code or writing, scripts. And I really found that I liked it. And I found that there were a lot of, particularly women, but men as well, who were looking for an intentional frame of reference, right?
Mhm.
Like trying to come in and say, yes, of course, I want to achieve my career goals and have financial stability, but I also want to be a good leader. I want my organization to give back to the world in some way. And so I found that I was kind of attracting people who were interested in a more intentional leadership style. And it's been lovely. I mean, I really enjoy. I've been doing it now for a decade. I've worked with a variety of different leaders, and I really find that there's something very fulfilling about working with someone who is genuinely interested in growing and changing and really is looking for a partnership, right? Like this idea of like, what can we co-create?
Mhm.
And it's very, yeah, it's surprising. It wasn't something that I thought that I would want to do, but I found it to be deeply rewarding.
That's so beautiful. And your face glows when you talk about it. So you know you're in your zone of genius.
Mhm.
I always tell my clients, you know that you are in the right niche when you glow, when you talk about it. It makes you feel good. That's wonderful. So tell us, what's the best way for our audience to connect with you and how do we get your book?
So you can find me on most places at S Peirolo. My website is speirolo.com. It's PEI. You can get in touch with me there, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok. The book is on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. If you're listening in the Europe, you can get it from my publisher, Shepherd Walwyn, in the UK. And I would love to hear from people. I'm also on Substack. It's called Fierce Grace. And then I have a podcast that I do with my friend Eugene Robinson. It's called The Bad Boss Brief, where we talk about work and bad bosses.
You must have a lot of content for that.
We do. We do. Yeah.
I love that. Bad Bosses, everyone tune in to that podcast, get the book, and be sure to connect with Stephanie and see how she can support you on your journey. And, when you think about the choices that you have to make, how do you come to the decision? How do you know it's the right decision? I know my clients and I have this conversation all the time. They're always worried about, oh, what happens if I make this decision? Is this price point perfect? And there's a lot of anxiety that goes into being your own boss because you don't have anyone to bounce it off of, right? So really understanding who you are and tapping into that higher power, that intuition of yours so that you can bring in the money that you want to live the lifestyle that you desire because remember, it doesn't matter how much money you have, it's what you do with it. Hey mompreneurs, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, please follow the show and share it with a friend who's rebuilding her finances after divorce. No spreadsheets, no restrictive budgets, only confidence to build financial freedom. Also, please drop a quick 5-star review so more moms starting over can find this. It lights me up to know this podcast is helping you. Inhale confidence, exhale scarcity. I'll meet you back on Tuesday for another episode. It doesn't matter how much money you have, it's what you do with it.